It's another episode of the D-Noise Podcast, where we, the Blenderheads at CG Cookie, are here to discuss all things pertaining to computer graphics and its premier open source software, Blender. We're also trying to bring some clarity into the discourse that's often as noisy as your cycle's renders. Today is a juicy one. Artificial intelligence is causing quite the fuss in the world of art, technology, and computer graphics. What does it all mean? We're going to find out with guests Jon Denning, PhD, Associate Professor, and Co-Chair of the Computer Science and Engineering Department at Taylor University, and the primary developer behind ReTopoFlow. We also have Kyle Unziker, longtime friend, collaborator, and now crew member of CG Cookie, web designer extraordinaire, always with two fingers on the pulse of art and technology. Once again, we have Tim von Rueden with us today, hailing from the front lines of the 2D art world, which has been and is still being hit quite hard by generative AI. And finally, I'm Kent Trammell, inviting you to grab your popcorn. Gentlemen, today we have a spicy topic: artificial intelligence, mainly with respect to art, and it's hotly debated right now. It's not every day that we talk about this in the Blender realm, but it's happening. It's in our backyard. I'm excited to talk about it. I'm excited to hear what you all have to say. To get the ball rolling, I wondered if we could maybe get Jon, since you are a PhD in computer science, to kind of introduce AI, overview it, and then we'll talk about how it corresponds to art.
Sure. I'm Jon. My main specialty is in graphics, so I'm really, really interested in how AI will help kind of push forward new graphic techniques. To go to your question, what makes it AI, or what makes it interesting? So AI has actually been around for a very long time, since the beginning of computings and computerization of robots, especially with computer vision, which is a whole another interesting story. But what's interesting now is our processing power is so great, and the amount of data that we have access to is so great that we've hit sort of this weird synergy point of all these past ways of looking at this information and new ways to make connections. And now we're just seeing tons and tons of progress very quickly in this area. And it's being applied in so many different ways. There's a lot of talk about where we are on the curve of adoption of technology, and there's a lot of speculation that we're just now starting to take off. So there's some really interesting things to happen, but still a lot of questions about what all can we do, what all ought we do. There's a whole ethical and philosophical side, legal side, but then the creativity side of like, how can this be used as a tool?
When it comes to intelligence, sometimes I wonder about what exactly that means.
That's a very interesting question that we're trying to understand at this point. So Alan Turing had sort of this idea of what it meant for a computer to be intelligent. And he had a Turing test, a mechanism for like determining whether something is sufficiently intelligent. There were two parties and they were separated from one another, but they could communicate very simply. And the idea is, if the message you get back, if you could look at that and not tell whether it was a human that did this or a computer that did this, then that was some measure of intelligence, some milestone, at which point then, the computers are now as intelligent as we are. And you kind of see this in the art industry with like visual effects, where you can no longer tell what is a photograph and what is completely CGI. But now we're starting to see it in a new front, which is in conversation. There's some classic sentences that tend to trip up computers, but not humans. But now we've gotten to the point where computers are able to parse sentences well enough that they can interpret the types of questions that we tend to ask. It's not very structured. People are very messy. They ramble on, they talk, they bring in all sorts of different subjects or have huge amounts of assumptions that go into the conversation. And the computer is finally starting to get to that point where they can make that connection and make it seem like that it's a person on the other end of the chat window and not a computer. what is intelligence? That's a really tricky question. I think Turing's test is now like gone. Like we have to think of a new way to sort of determine, is it intelligent, or just declare that it is and start looking at other things like, is it creative? Is it self-reflective? There are other attributes that we can do. Intelligence may just be like one peg up, but there's, many other pegs and other dimensions to measure.
When I think of intelligence and AI, people like to talk about it surpassing mankind's intelligence. And I feel like it's often defined by like processing power, like you said, the exponential growth of or increase in processing power since it was predicted in like the 70s or whenever that was. If it is just processing power, then yeah, I guess so. But I don't know. I feel like experience is a huge part of intelligence.
Well, I was just reading that Google's new AI chatbot, Bard, will already defend conspiracy theories for you. So when you think of intelligence, is it computational power? Yes. Being, sentence comprehension? Yes. But when it's telling you back some sort of conspiracy theory as if it's fact, obviously it's just regurgitating what it was given.
Can anybody describe the brightest future involving AI?
Yeah, if we put AI towards medical research challenges, and it could accelerate our ability to come up with cures or treatments or something.
The only other thing I would say is kind of like what Kyle was saying, things outside of entertainment. I think like taxes and stuff, that being automated. I think there are like a lot of benefits that aren't as obvious, but when you start to think of it, it's like, oh yeah, that could be a huge help in this area.
It's a little bit harder for me to think of good ends outside of something like that, because so far all I've seen is there's already an arms race to be like, who's going to be the biggest AI or whatever. And it's often framed in these sort of Silicon Valley competition terms. And yes, everyone's raising alarms and flags and whatnot, but like, is it too late even? Is the cat out of the bag, so to speak?
The bright future that I've been able to, I guess, interpret paints this picture of AI being like a super assistant. It never is portrayed or expected or hoped to take over the human side, but it's always supposed to help. And some of those things do excite me a little bit, and I can see that bright future. But like you said, Kyle, it's a cat that you don't want to let out of the bag. Does anyone have thoughts about where that line is? Like, how can you possibly contain this cat?
I mean, I'm sure AI governance is going to be a whole new academic avenue. Do y'all remember 6 or 7 years ago, Microsoft released an AI chatbot and it had a Twitter account and it would tweet back to things. And within 12 hours, they took it down because people were feeding it vile stuff. And then when other people would tweet at it, it would say like terrible things back to them. And so they literally just hold the plug, we're done. In order to prevent that, you have to put so many safeguards in place. They're not the first industry to come out with something and it gets super popular and then regulation has to follow. But I think the challenge is that because it's progressing so fast, my concern would be that it gets out of control before we can sort of set proper governing standards. Coupled with the fact that, at least in the US, our elected leaders are probably in the aggregate pretty tech illiterate. It's hard not to get super cynical. It's a little dystopian. That's how I feel about it.
It's hard not to venture there, at least to some degree.
Right. I wish I was one of the excited people.
It's like one of those film or narrative tropes that is so common that it's just bizarre that we're like facing it now. We don't seem to have a good handle on it, or no one knows for sure what the control will be, how effective that will be. Is it as easy as pulling the plug, or is it actually stupider than we think? When I use my Amazon Alexa, I'm like, okay, we got plenty of time before this is actually scary. Jon, do you have anything to offer us from a technical side?
Back in my undergrad, one of the classes I took was to create this software that ran on a robot. And the idea was this robot had a lot of different sensors. It had sonar, it had the camera, it had audio, it could move around. So it had a lot of inputs and a little bit of output. And the task was that this robot could be placed in any room in this one particular building, and the objective was to figure out which room you're in. This was quite a while ago, so we didn't have a lot of like the 3D reconstruction tools we do now. So we basically had to hodgepodge our own system together. And like I said, it was projects-based, so we were working together. But one of the things that the instructor told us that's really kind of stuck with me, and I hear the same kind of warning, is to not use neural networks, that we were not allowed to use a neural network. Neural network's just another way to train, or it's another form of AI. You can train these weights to figure out, okay, given this input, what is the likelihood of it being these particular outputs, which could be the different rooms. So what I see, which room am I in? And the reason for this, and this is kind of tying back to your question, we don't fully understand neural networks. They will produce an answer and they may be highly confident and it may sound reasonable what their answer is, but we cannot fully understand why it arrived at that answer. And the reason why this is an issue is if you were to feed in some arbitrary information, like put it in a brand new room, it'll come up with an answer, but we couldn't say how it came up with that. Or if there was a nefarious actor, they could figure out ways to, different input to feed into it, and it'll produce an output, but we can't predict what it's going to say without feeding it through. And so anytime I see these trained systems, and today's ChatGPT and all these other visual AI creation systems out there, they're just fancy versions of these neural networks. They're just more complicated, way more input. And so we're like, it'll produce an answer, but why it came to this one, I don't really know. The safeguards, I think, are going to be impossible, no matter what sort of guarding that we can do on types of inputs. But I think we can educate ourselves maybe through films, the Terminator 1 and 2 movies being like standard films that we show, right next to Romeo and Juliet, for high schoolers, teaching, the next generation of politicians and people who are going to be in charge, teaching them like where to put this sort of tech. Like, it's going to give me an answer, but what do you do with that answer? And like you had said, Kent, the super assistant, like if you always think of it as being an assistant to somebody who makes the decisions and not actually making the decisions, then I think that's fairly safe, about as safe as we can get. But anytime we put too much control in these systems, that's when the T-800 is going to come back in time and try to take over the world, and all sorts of bad things are going to happen.
That was great, but I have to give you like 1 star on comforting me from a technical standpoint. So then maybe now we can segue more toward the art and creative world. I'm eager to hear, Tim, because you led on in our last podcast that you have some spicy experience with AI and art. And I want to hear from a 2D artist what it's like in that world right now.
I don't even feel like I'm trying to get involved with AI, but I feel like I'm being forced to get involved with it, especially because it's become such a large part of the convention scene. And then it's really starting to infiltrate into the concept art jobs. I can't say too much because a lot of my friends are under NDAs and stuff, but a lot of these animation studios and a lot of these places now are making in-house AI, and they're just putting in their own work that they've created already and regurgitating new stuff without the need of any artist anymore. You could imagine in a couple years, Disney won't have a lot of concept artists anymore. Those have a small team that are using their internal database essentially to spit out new concepts. A lot of my friends have lost their jobs already, and I feel like we're just at the beginning point. That's why when Kyle said the cat's out of the bag, I'm like, it's only going to get way worse. Literally, I was watching South Park last week and they had ChatGPT on it and they were making fun of it, but then the second half of the episode was written by ChatGPT. And it was like this whole joke that they were playing on of like, this will probably be the future of shows that you're watching won't be written by people anymore. I was watching this discussion about how it's super cool but super weird because it's starting to do not just static images, but animation and visual stuff that is like film-based. You might be able eventually to put in your own input. Like, I want to watch an 80s fantasy movie with Lady Gaga as the heroine and whoever as the villain, and it'll spit something back out at you. And the more detailed description you put in, the more you'll get out. So it's going to really affect anything that's visual, verbiage, or number-based. Your jobs are in super trouble. And I'm seeing it now, especially with cons. There are some cons. Thankfully, cons are definitely more on the, wanting to support artists, and they've banned it, but it's getting difficult to decipher what is AI, what's not AI. And yeah, there's things like even earlier this week, there's this big petition from Carla Ortiz, and she passed this law that's going into effect. And they produced this app that you can basically put something on your image so that it won't be able to be read by Midjourney. It's called Glaze. That's what it's called. And the problem is, yeah, it's protecting it now, but AI is going to be able to figure a way around it. So it feels like, yeah, it's a small victory, but it's a losing war. Obviously, I'm a traditional artist. I do pencil work, but I had this discussion with a younger person, and the whole discussion was about, does it matter that it was done by a human or not? Like, do you care that I did this by hand? And they said no. The way that I've been able to comfort myself is millennials and higher in age, I think, still care for that handcrafted human input work. But I do fully believe the next generation, if not the Gen Z, I think the iGen or whatever the generation after that is, I think they will very much not only embrace AI, but like be in full support of it over human-based things.
Whoa. All right, this is getting worse.
That said, I mean, as a millennial, I think at one point, people said the same thing about millennials. You know, we weren't buying CDs or anything. We wanted to download, we wanted to stream and whatnot. And from my own experience, I've certainly spent my entire adult life in an industry where I am online for my job. So I am fully tethered to digital and internet. And because of that, I've actually needed to reintroduce tactile, handmade things into my life to be more fulfilled. You know, I will collect vinyl. I want to buy handmade art from my friends. I do wonder, if I think of any sort of hope or silver linings, is if this continues to move as fast as it is, I wonder if the consequences will be laid bare soon enough that we can actually start maybe walk back some things. I know it's maybe wish casting and certainly goes against my previous commentary where I was just like, nope, it's already out of the bag. We can't do anything. I guess one way to put it is I would hope that collectively we don't all take the stance of that young person you were talking to, Tim. I mean, I think I see it in pop culture already, where there's a common storytelling trope is we got too caught up in computers and we need to reconnect as humans. I think that's based in truth. I think that's based in a shared human experience. And my hope is that we save ourselves from ourselves, I suppose is the way to put it.
That resonates a lot with me. That also is why I don't lose sleep over AI right now. If I think about it too much, I guess you could say I start to lose my peace. But I also share this faith in humanity that we are capable of learning and improving. We almost certainly have to go through doing it wrong and the consequences that come with that. But at some point, there will be improvement and learning from the mistake. Tim, I wanted to get clarification. So you have colleagues who are losing their jobs. Is it because of AI? Like they're being replaced by AI?
Well, if you think about it, imagine like a big animation studio. They have like 250 animators, or specifically for concept artists, there might be like 30 to 50 on the team. Well, what if you only need 5? And like the amount of money they would save, that's over $1 million probably if you include the salaries alone. I mean, they're going to download Midjourney for $30 a month if they can save $1 million. You know, I have one of my friends, I won't say his name, but he has been working with his own AI developer to do his own style for him so that he doesn't have to digitally paint anymore. And it's so bizarre to me, but it kind of is working. I don't feel super threatened by it yet because its pencil output is horrible. It looks terrible. But like, I'm also not ignorant to think that it won't be, that for much longer. But I have some other friends that feel super non-threatened by this. They're like, you know what, Tim? As long as there's people that appreciate handcrafted things, like we'll be fine. Just keep going your route. And as long as there's millennials alive while you're alive, you're fine. That's how they kind of worded it to me. The thing is, though, I don't want to be like a super negative Nancy about it because, yes, I think it'll be cool in like 5 years when I can make my own movies with whatever actors I want. But is it super creepy and kind of scary? Yes. And then you hear the scandal on Twitch with, I don't know if I'm even allowed to say it, but the whole scandal that happened with that where someone's imposing a woman's face on something else. And people are making money off of that, where now you can't even trust if what you're seeing is that person anymore. And I was watching this one video about, let's say you're really camera shy. Someone developed AI where they could read off a script off screen, but the AI made it look like they were looking at the camera the whole time. Like, that's super creepy to me. But yeah, it's super exciting. The possibilities seem endless. but I'm trying to hold on to that hope like you guys are. But I do think we're going to have a really hard time remembering to touch the grass in the next 10 years, I feel.
John, where do you land on, are you hopeful? Is that where you're betting on, or you dig in a silo in the yard?
I teach at a university. I teach computer science, and I think we've had this sort of a thing around for just a little bit longer than the rest of the world in terms of art or film or even writing. So we have lots of really great AI-driven tools for helping us code. But now these AI systems are able to basically write code for you. I did try on a couple of my assignments to coerce ChatGPT into writing a solution to it. It produced something, but it wasn't quite good enough. And I think the bit is it's just complicated enough that it's not able to do it. So all of the pictures of hands, for example, with the fingers, with Midjourney and Stable Diffusion, having like extra fingers on there. I think there's just enough complexity there that it's not able to handle that. But I agree, 5 years or even less than that, maybe 5 months down the road, they'll be able to solve more complicated problems. But one thing that I tell my students is we're here to train you to be good coders. All of these systems, at least presently, and I believe it'll continue on in the future, it is only mixing up what it's seen before, what it's been trained on before. So it's only able to do what it's seen other people do. I want to make sure that we are producing good content producers.
Wow, it's always comforting to me when I hear that AI will never be actually creative. The fact that it has to be trained on existing data, and right now it's got the freshest human-only data set in history. At some point, it's going to be sourcing its own data, right? Like at some point, Midjourney is going to look at images with 7 fingers and have to consider that as data. I mean, is that kind of loop a problem, do you think?
It itself will not be able to properly manage that feedback loop and to learn from it correctly, to be able to treat that information in the right way. It'll just learn, oh, well, maybe this is a style that everyone has 7 fingers or whatever. Humans are like, no, obviously they don't have 7 fingers. This is incorrect. Like we can categorically say that is not right.
I think I should admit that since I'm hopeful, I try and interpret or see things through that lens of where are there built-in safeguards. Right now, I feel like AI is meme heaven, where it's just so funny that at some point, I guess it'll definitely reach seriousness. But in terms of art, the question that kind of is a line in the sand to me is whenever the first animated feature is produced by AI and I guess a handful of directors or guiders, prompters, I don't know what you really call them, but that's definitely going to happen. And I wonder what the world's reaction will be. Obviously, it's a novelty, and let's see what this machine came up with. But I asked some friends who have no connection to art, and I said, if you knew that a movie was made without human hands touching it, would you care? Would that affect, your appreciation for it, your desire to see it? And I was a little shocked that none of them had a problem with it at the forefront. I wonder if they thought I'm the tech nerd in the circle of friends. So like maybe I'm into AI. So yeah, I'm cool with it. But they all answered, no, I would give it a shot. I wouldn't be turned off immediately that humans did not touch this. I should also admit, though, that when you say the 80s fantasy film with Lady Gaga as a protagonist, I was like, that would make for some amazing parties. Pre-dinner, we talk about what the movie we want to see. Over dinner, it generates, and then we watch it. Like, that could be a riot.
Well, just to answer your point, though, so the animation films are already out. Netflix released one called The Dog and the Boy, and that one received really heavy backlash. Linkin Park's two new music videos are AI generated. Like, it's moving so fast, I don't even think we comprehend. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if by the end of the year we see an AI film in the theaters.
I know, Tim, you and I have had many conversations, film reviews and stuff, that we find a lot of satisfaction and joy in analyzing films, deep meaning, deep imagery and expression through art. I mean, if machines are not creative, they're not having experiences, I tend to be comforted that when those movies come out, they will either be so cookie cutter or extrapolated from existing data that it will take the most shallow minds to be stimulated by that. That's kind of what I would predict is for maybe a generation or something, let's say 10 years maybe, that's the norm, and the studios are saving so much money making these cookie cutter nonsense AI generated soulless media. If that's the case, surely mankind is going to be, we're going to start to analyze the negative effects that will have on our brains and correct, right? Like start to redevelop the appreciation for the old art form of animation or the old art form of CG even.
I was looking at a text AI, and it was so well written. It's a thing that's happening in colleges right now because my cousins are in college and they even admitted they cheat. They use Chat GPT all the time. And it'll be like a paper on the effects of economics during the slavery, like whatever. You could type in something really detailed. I think it would be silly for me to think that that wouldn't translate into visual medium, especially because when you watch a lot of, animation films nowadays, they are very cookie cutter already. I was going to joke and say that Disney remakes already beat it to the punch of being soulless. So I can't imagine AI being any worse. And if anything, I would think it would improve upon what you're already seeing. It's tough, Kent. It's really tough.
One of the TED Talks I watched, I was surprised because he was a proponent. I think the title was like how AI will save humanity or something like that. So what a theme in his talk was that it will enable us to focus on what's most important. And so he said these repetitive routine jobs, I guess is what he said. Like, yes, those will be lost, but it will free us up to focus on like compassion, things that AI cannot do, including, he said creativity was one of them, like art jobs are safe, which is funny, given what we're talking about. So that was years ago. That was like 4 or 5 years ago. And I wonder, coming back to the example we're kind of talking through here, is will it take a generation of brain dead AI recycled media for mankind to realize there was more to that at one time? I think of like the food industry in this case. Like I'll bet when preservatives and growth hormones hit the scene, like how exciting and industry changing that was. And for I don't know how many decades it did that. But eventually we started to realize this is really bad for us, actually. So let's roll it back. A lot of friends have like chicken coops now. They've got vegetable gardens. It's not like fixed or anything. We still have those things going on. But that's where my faith in humanity kind of comes back. I can't imagine a society like thinking that AI generated recycled material would ever connect to them on a meaningful way, the way a human-made thing will.
I mean, I wonder if AI media becomes a genre eventually where it serves maybe a fundamentally different purpose. I'm a graphic designer, a brand designer, and one thing that actually came to mind when I was thinking about this conversation is the use of procedural generated designs. A brand today is not just a logo, right? To really drive home that it's your brand, you need a lot more things than just a logo. And so in branding, procedural art was used for things like, say, pattern generation, right? You give it, part of our graphic language is geometric shapes, and you feed it through code to make it spit out 100 uniquely arranged patterns, which you can then use how you want. And then I think of other things like, they call it creative coding, where people will create art literally just with their text editor and their language of choice. And they'll create these crazy kaleidoscopic things. And the fact that I know is procedurally generated and or, hand coded is part of the appeal. I'm not reacting just to what I'm looking at. I'm reacting to the human intelligence that went into conceiving that idea and into creating it. The idea of like AI movies as a genre, I could see human ingenuity bending that to create some interesting, unexpected things. That human intent, that human hand behind it is so integral to what I enjoy, even in the things that I enjoy that used machine learning as part of the process.
We're not convincing Tim.
I think I'm seeing how good it's getting so quickly. And there have been a lot of times where I have thought actually the AI generated art is better than some of the artists that I see at conventions. And when I go to colleges to speak, AI is definitely trumping most of them. And it's scary on some level because then it kind of comes down to like, what is the human experience? Why do we appreciate the human experience? What makes whatever we create as humans different than what an AI is able to output? And it's been a very difficult question for me to answer. And I've talked to my friends. We were talking about how we're all kind of our own processors, if you want to think of it like that way. So we're just taking in the information we see and then spitting it out into something that we create. What's so different from us doing that in a computer? And I think as we see it progress, a computer is going to be able to take in way more information, and they're going to see like, oh, this has an emotional impact on that person. I'm going to include that into what I'm working on. And I think it will be emotionally more impactful. Like, I don't think they'll be hollow or very vapid. I think we'll see them become like very well-written, emotional laced films. And I think it comes down to like you as the viewer, what you are viewing, your experience with it, that is very human. But I think the thing that you're watching, I have a feeling in the future it won't matter if it was created by a human or a computer, because what your experience with it is, that will still remain human. But it does scare me thinking that the product that you're experiencing, who cares where it's from anymore? And I think as an artist, I will always love drawing as like, you learn to love the process. And that's what you always try to teach students and artists of all kind. Like, if you're only going for the end results, you're missing the joy of why you do art to begin with. So I think for me, I never saw like the process of making art the problem, but I think a lot of tech people see that as like, okay, well, how do we get to the final result quicker? How do we make this more efficient? And I think by doing that, they're eliminating what I feel is essential to being an artist. And does it scare me that, yeah, someone might look at something I create and something that AI creates and think we're on equal levels? Yeah, and I have waves where I go through feeling that way, but I think weirdly I've come to accept it in the last few months, because I think AI will be good enough where it will hit our emotional strings, our human core, because AI will be able to sense and pick up on what that is and then replicate it, as gross as that sounds.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I don't think that it can imitate it in a way that is convincing. I just think we're going to have a radar for that.
Do you have Midjourney or like one of these softwares?
No, I don't use them. Oh, shoot. Did my whole argument just fall through the floor?
When it was very new, everyone was using it because we didn't realize how big this would be. If you type in thing like Thomas Kincaid painting, you could have fooled me easily. I would have never been able to tell a real one versus a fake one. And yes, it does become a little obvious if there's like hands involved. There are some styles that I thought wouldn't be able to replicate very easily. And then like Beksinski, or there's a lot of artists that, oh my God, not only are they able to replicate the style, but me being someone who's like super involved with the art world, I'm having a difficult time deciphering what is AI and what's not. I think when, general public uses Midjourney, it's very obvious. It's very crappy outputs, but when someone knows what they're doing, and I got pretty close to it last May, I was able to create stuff where I'm like, this is actually not bad. It doesn't look like the typical Midjourney output. And then my friend that's now developing his own AI with his own work, he was showing me a few. He's like, Tim, which ones did I paint? Which ones were generated? And I was having such a hard time deciphering it because they are replicating Photoshop brushstrokes very well. I guess the best example of why this makes me a little nervous is one of my partner's friends. They got the Instagram AI thing that makes like 15 profile pictures for you instantly. And I could overhear the conversation in my room. And she just said, point blank, why would I pay an artist to make me 15 images separately? And it would probably be like $100+ when I could just pay $8 for this thing to make it for me. And I think that kind of summed it up for me. I'm like, the general public, I don't think cares where it comes from. I think artists care. I think people who are in the creative field will care. But like, it would be a hard time convincing me that the general public cares if a human drew or paint this. Maybe they will for like furniture or things that are more bougie, but I don't know, for like an art print, especially if it's like fantasy themed, I don't think they care if their dragon was generated or if that dragon was painted in Photoshop by a human.
Okay, let me ask you then, are you worried that AI can turn off the generations to come from learning traditional drawing or digital drawing even? Like,
look, just Google or just YouTube how to make money with AI in the art realm. It's like the new popular thing of how can I not do the actual process? How can I still make money without actually having to learn how to do art?
It's a scam. Like, that cannot have longevity. If everyone can do it, the value is gone. So I think I've heard the argument that our grandkids will not want to learn drawing at all because you can just let the AI do it. The camera didn't stop people from learning to draw. IKEA didn't stop people from learning to make furniture. That's what I mean. Over time, I feel like humanity starts to reappreciate what was so valuable back then. Now, it killed industries and it will change ours big time. I don't think artists will be able to make money like we have in the traditional studio format. That will change. But as far as will computer graphics, will illustration, I'm sure music is going to be hit pretty hard by this. Will those art forms die because AI can do it at the click of a button? I am not remotely convinced that that is in our future at all.
I don't know. This goes, I think, deeper into if AI starts replacing everything, what is our purpose? What's the end goal? Let's say movies, films, everything gets replaced by AI. Video games, I heard down the line, like programming will be AI. So you could be like, I want to play this type of game, and it'll pop something up for you. If everything's being done for us, what is our purpose? Why are we existing? And I think that's why this is causing a lot of stress with people, is because I think it's making people confront their identity. Their sense of reality is definitely being warped. What you guys have seen is very hopeful. I feel like I've accepted, I don't want to say a nihilistic perspective, but I guess kind of, where yeah, I think a lot of this will be replaced, especially in like 50 years. It would be perplexing for me to think that someone would want to learn oil painting in 50 years.
They're still there with Photoshop, right? And you used to be Photoshop artists, and then you went traditional.
I like the tactile feel of pushing graphite onto paper. I think there's something that connects with people when they can tell it was hand-drawn. Digital, regardless of what you think, it is easier because Liquify is a tool, making flat colors, selecting things. It's easier. It doesn't mean its worth has less value. I need to make sure that's included because it doesn't. Digital art can be just as impactful as traditional. But for me personally, I loved when I met some of the older masters of Alan Williams and Brahm and these artists that went to cons that are like 50 plus years in age, and they like really embraced traditional, and watching them work, specifically, they taught me the joy of the process of making art. And I think I took away so much of that. And I think that's why I switched to traditional, because when I make a mistake, I don't see it as a mistake when I do traditional. When I do digital, it's like, okay, that's a mistake. I need to make it look perfect. Traditional, it's like, oh, how can I work with this instead? And the process is so important to me. I'll never lose that. I hope to pass that mentality on to newer artists, because I think everyone is so focused on end goal. Social media is not making it easier, especially with Reels and TikToks and YouTube Shorts, where everything is like quick cut, 7 seconds or less, show your process and push something out every other day. That's not supposed to be the point of art making. And this goes back into what I was saying before of like, why are we here? What's the human experience worth for you? And that's why making art for me is my joy in life. So I'll never lose that. And traditional gives me that. Not that digital didn't, but I think traditional definitely gives it to me more so.
I don't think you could have proven my point any better. I mean, I think in 50 years,
yeah, but Ken,
swap out.
I grew up with it though. That's the difference. Is these kids are growing up with iPads in their face at 2 years old, and parents filming them for TikToks, like a camera in your face.
That's so true. I mean, the iPad my kids have too. One of my kids will stay on it all day long, and we have to safeguard it. But it doesn't change the fact that he's in a horrible mood. All of them, if they're on it, they're just lesser human beings the longer they're on it.
My daughter's 11. We got her an iPad pretty early during lockdown in 2020 so she could FaceTime her cousins. Pretty quickly, she became, the child that is on a screen every single day. And even if you're grounded from one screen, there's a couple others she can go to. She draws all day, every day. I gave her an Apple Pencil, Procreate. She vastly prefers markers, pencils. So maybe there's hope.
Yeah, maybe it's the kid angle offers some hope for me too. That I don't think there's any way that kids will literally stop drawing. It's just in their nature. Do I think that future generations will see less artists? Probably, but I mean, there's so many dead ancient art forms that we see come back that, one person passed down from generation, and now it's got a whole YouTube channel that people are into. I mean, like you said, it's the same thing that made you go to traditional. It was that tactile, taking an object and like scribing it into an image was a big deal to you. And I think the whole world will come to terms with what are we going to do with this technology and how easy it makes everything. I just can't, nothing in me says everyone will say, give me the machines.
I'm almost an exclusively digital practitioner, largely because of my skill gaps with traditional forms. I went to school for digital design, and I even went the route of switching to traditional because, I had mentors that would talk about how much it can inform your digital skills, which is it's absolutely true. So it's interesting to see, Adobe, for example, just came out with their AI tool called Firefly, I think. The demo had them sketching out a couple different monograms. So it's like the letter B and all these different shapes and sizes. And then the demo person, like on their iPad, circled one of the Bs, brought up the AI prompt and typed in, give me 4 vector variations of this sketch. and that B turns into editable Illustrator shapes. I admit, I was like, I want that. If I put myself in that presenter's shoes, I feel like, dang, I could use that and still feel like I retain ownership over both the concept and the execution. Because one, it was my sketch that was the initial input. And two, whatever it gives me, I'm not going to just like, cool, I'm done. Like, I'm going to take that and mess with it and mold it different ways. And, when I talk about being a purely digital practitioner, even things like without this, I'm literally using the computer to like make something I can't even conceive of yet. And then I'll decide when to move forward. This demo made me think of that kind of thing just on a much bigger, faster, more computational processing scale. I don't know if there's any industry people that I respect that I've seen come out truly in favor of these tools or like excited about these tools.
I'm with Tim in that the ownership you have in the journey and the hard work you put in, while it was daunting in the beginning, and I think it still turns off a lot of people from fully realizing their creative potential, now it's such a integral part of why I like computer graphics. The Corridor Crew made a anime AI generated video, very controversial, but what he described was these tools in the hands of an aspiring artist, like a teenager who wants to make movies. And I was that teenager. I wanted to do that. And I tried to make a movie with my friends and it never worked out because it was just way too much work. That would have been cool, maybe, to make this movie with these tools.
See, now I feel like you're proving my point, where these younger kids, as soon as they realize that like this technology is available, why do it by hand? I could just like imagine if you were 16, 15 again and you were given AI and like being able to animate something with your friends. I think the years that you would have spent between your like age 15 and 25 would not have been developing your own skills through learning modeling or whatever. It'd be like finessing AI to give you the output that you're looking for.
That's a very valid point. We can't know for sure. I just know for a fact in my experience that the difficulty almost of the situation is directly tied to the reward in the end. And so the easier it is, the less satisfying it is, the less ownership I have of it. And I try and tell people learning that now, I hate retopology, I hate UV layout, right? I hate these tedious parts of the process. But now I throw on a podcast, I throw on my favorite album or favorite artist and just turn my brain off, do good work, and the day passes. It's a great day. It's one of my favorite parts of the workflow. I don't mean to say that like work is an idol, so to speak, of our culture. I think that is a very real problem in parts of the world. I don't think for that 15-year-old version of me that created this movie would have had any sense that that was special that I did this. Tim, did your parents draw?
No, they're like the very opposite of artists.
So, I mean, when you said you grew up drawing, you weren't directly taught to draw by your parents. So like the future generations that maybe like AI art, I mean, if it's for rebellion, traditional rebellious reasons, maybe I have total hope and faith that future generations will not let these art forms die. I mean...
Yeah, I don't know. I would say like as a kid, I was such a shy, awkward kid. That was my way of communicating with people through like a visual language rather than a verbal language. I guess who am I to say that me picking up a pencil and learning to draw when I was younger is any different than a kid learning AI when they're 7, 8 years old? And like their connection to it is just as deep as my connection was with picking up a pencil. And their output, who's to say my traditional drawing is any different than their AI generated output in the long run? I feel like even just you wording it out, and I think you're starting to understand, oh, wait, yeah, if I was younger, I think I would have possibly gotten into this too. I definitely think a lot of kids are going to have that feeling when they discover or stumble upon AI that is exciting, especially in like a film, entertainment industry. And then it begs the question of, as humans, are we just constantly looking to be entertained? And that's why we're so distracted with like YouTube and movies, films, TVs, That scares me a little bit, thinking that the state of a human is kind of this lazy, just wanting to be entertained constantly. But then I'm like, wait, am I the problem? Am I conditioned since I was younger to value hard work and like, grinding for 4 or 5 hours with things on the background? I don't know.
Automation threatening certain industries has been the theme of humanity since the 1800s. And we know that computers has accelerated that exponentially, and feels like now AI specifically has kicked it into even greater gear. It makes me think of automated cars. People are legitimately concerned about the trucking industry and how automated cars could disrupt that. Well, thankfully, the automotive industry has had a rocky rollout, right? Like, it hasn't gotten the speed of adoption that AI has. And I mean, you point to startup culture. The whole idea of digital startups is like they are uniquely positioned to like take off crazy fast. Overhead is super low. You don't need any physical resources, like all this different stuff. And AI is right there, where I think even people outside of our industries will have to reckon with in somehow, again, specifically because of the speed at which it's happening. Again, maybe I've said this in different ways this whole time, but like it just feels like we're all going to have to, quote unquote, reckon with it or deal with it in some collective way sooner than we think.
What you said, Tim, you mentioned soul searching, and then Kyle, you kind of phrased it like, we're going to have to reckon with this. I think if I were to boil down my hopeful side, it's that when mankind has to soul search, that's when I think we improve. Okay, John, you've been quiet. Are we just out in left field from a technical standpoint? Are you thinking like these guys don't have a clue what's coming?
I think technically we could do some tremendously incredible things. We're already starting to see, this base system being applied to video, to audio, and mixing in entirely unique experiences into some unique storytelling aspect to it. So I think there's some like really interesting potential there, but it's us humans that are going to be wielding it. I think even beyond the creators, like you all create art, but the next generation, they will have to reckon with, are they going to continue to be consumers? And we're already starting to hit that with, TikTok and YouTube, and everyone's wanting to be a influencer or whatever, but how much time do they actually spend scrolling on their screen throughout the day, like not actually creating content? I think it will be a time that humans will look at what they are doing, how they are using technology, what are they doing with their life, and reevaluating and hopefully making some good decisions. I think about the movie WALL-E and, the advanced civilization who they were just literal consumers on floating chairs, and something broke the pattern, and then everyone just was like, hey, let's make a pizza plant. I think there's an innate thing to what makes humans, and that's that creative component. When you see somebody creating, and AI may get to the point where you watch it create, and that could be interesting, but I think there's still something uniquely special to watching humans create. Just down the road, there's a Bob Ross museum, and just watching Bob Ross paint is just a beautiful thing. I think there will be a generation that's like, oh, I could do all this creativity, but then when you're just typing in text to produce something completely different, a movie or whatever, you'll look to the creators of the past and not necessarily like see all the hardship that they went through, but seeing that creativity through the hardship coming out and having sort of a yearning for it. But I think there will still be a heavy creative component that we as humans will always be yearning for. We may get distracted with the next shiny tool, but we'll come back to it.
All right. That's 4 stars for the comfort level. You've redeemed yourself.
It is a pretty scary thing to look forward to. There's a potential valley between here and there. I mean, you look at some of the stuff that super creative people, Corridor Digital, that they're able to make, but the big controversy around it. Like there's some really existential questions being brought up of like, what does it mean to create? What does it mean for us to use this? Is this actually intelligent? There's some really good things that are coming out, but that's more the philosophical side of things as opposed to technical. Yeah, it can get scarily effective. We'll put it that way. Like thinking about Terminator, technology taking over the world. I think that's a very valid potential, but I think we'll always check ourselves before getting, or at least I'm hopeful that we'll check ourselves before that happens.
No one knows for sure. That is, something's coming, and it's coming very fast. It's here. So we are along for the ride. I am definitely going to continue creating like I have been for a while. I imagine you two will do it as well. John, you're totally creative. I'm sorry I left you out like you weren't an artist. I'm sorry about that.
I'm not an artist. I tell my students I write programs to draw for me because I can't draw, but I'll make tools to help you guys do your cool things.
Well, that was a fascinating conversation. I at least felt like my understanding of what this situation could be is way better. So I appreciate your perspectives and bringing your human experience to this conversation. Thanks again to Tim, Kyle, and Jon for joining the discussion today. If you're interested in leveling up your Blender skills and supporting what we do, check out our extensive library of courses on cgcookie.com, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and please consider leaving us a review on your podcast player. We certainly appreciate it. Links are in the podcast description. That's it for today. As Tim said, don't forget to touch the grass, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Denoise Podcast.